Welcome to African Canada Voice, ACV. Today we are at the London Public Library, Central Library.
Figures indicate around 60 to 75,000 slaves escaped the States to reach Canada under the Underground Railroad. So Africans made up the largest number of migrants into the New World. Slavery would exist for about 450 years. An estimated 11 million Africans were transported to North and South America. And slavery ended in 1865 in the United States when the 13th Amendment was ratified after the Civil War.
Heather, welcome to our show. I just want to ask you to tell us a little bit more about your presentation today. It was highly impressive and a lot of history there about blacks in this area.
Yes.
Oxford County. And please tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to that research and all the stories surrounding that.
Sure. Okay. So I moved to Woodstock around in 1992 for my job, and a friend had showed me about a cemetery in Otterville, and I just was quite interested that, you know, if there was a cemetery, a black cemetery in Otterville, where a lot of people did not look like me. So I went to do a little bit of research and found that there was a research already completed about that as well. So I think that was my interest, just to find out why there was a black cemetery in that area, and then and this has led to doing this presentation.
Yeah, from that small start, you went to do all this research, and tell us a little bit more about this.
Okay, so when I went to find out about that, Ingersoll was some of the presentations that was there. There was around the 1850s, there was a population of about 2,000, and about 400 were blacks. That was the work of Mary Evans Smith, who was able to compile that history. And then from there, we just went a lot of the stories.
So just bringing closer to home, I was mentioning about the blacks coming around 1800s is when black people arrived in Oxford County. Ingersoll is located in southwestern Ontario in Oxford County, about 45 minutes from here. It was incorporated on January 1st in 1852, but during the 1850s, 1800s, there was about 2,000 residents in Ingersoll, and 400 of them were black. So the blacks, they had their own church. They had the Wesley Methodist Church and the British Episcopal Church. The Deli House and the Ingersoll Inn and John Brown, the American anti-slavery supporter, are all remnants of Ingersoll.
So in Oxford County, there's three distinctions. There's Ingersoll, there's Woodstock, there's Norwich Township, which includes Otterville as well. But the three areas in Oxford County, there were three distinct groups of black people. Not all of them were slaves. So in Ingersoll, we're more escaping slaves. And you know, like Chatham near the borders, that was more of the border community. They were able to establish their own churches and some other buildings there as well. In Woodstock, we're known to a lot of the history with some of the people that were there, and some of the families are still there today. Smith was about one of the largest families that still was there, and other settlers that we have as well. And in Otterville, that's where the cemetery was, and that's where they have the church is no longer there, but we do have the cemetery, and with the funding that we have, we're able to establish some stones to put there in there as well. So that's the distinct areas that we have. So it certainly is a rich history. But again, like we're saying, it's almost forgotten. So the research that was done, and continued to write articles on that, and in Joyce Pettigrew's book, A Safe Haven, The Story of Black Settlers of Oxford County, that sort of informs people of what the rich past history that we had in Oxford County.
The Underground Railroad did not only just exist in the States, it also happened here in Canada. So in Canada, we had about 21 terminals that existed. A lot of the communities along Lake Erie were associated with that. So people on this side of the border, Quakers was one of the religious associations that helped establish with the Underground Railroad in the 1600s. But not only is it Quakers, it was free blacks, it was sympathetic whites, North American Indians, and German farmers also helped to aid people along that way as well. So the reason why it was called the Underground Railroad was because of a term that was used when Tice Davids was a slave who escaped his owner. He jumped into the Ohio River to go to Ripley, Ohio, and when his slave owner had followed him through the boat, he disappeared along the shore, and he said it must have been some underground railroad. So that was how the terminology came as well.
Could you tell me more about the safe haven, the story of black settlers?
Okay. So Joyce Pettigrew is a historian in Otterville, and we had some finances to be able to conduct this. So this was quite a few of a conduct search that she had done. Lots of stories that people have filed with her, and some of the information, just a per token of this is the first book that I found out about talking about blacks in Canada. I had all my education here in the area, but it was only in my 20s that I found out that about the black history in Canada, that there was even slavery with that as well. This is Dr. Daniel Hill's book. So, the singer and the author is their father, who also started the Black Ontario History Society as well. So it was quite interesting. And Oxford County is also mentioned in here as well. But Joyce Pettigrew was able to get more of that history to flesh it out and to talk a lot about the families with there as well. So.
A little more about the first black person who came to Canada. You were making it part of your presentation.
Matthew Jocasta. So in the 1600s, he came here with the French explorers, and he was translated between the Mi'kmaq Indians. So although he was the first black person, he was not a slave. He spoke 5 different languages. He was an explorer, a pioneer. So he was just amazing. In Canada, though, the first black slave was a 6-year-old boy from Madagascar, Olivier Lejeune, and he took his name from a priest, and that was someone who, that was the first black slave in Canada as well. So a lot of people aren't familiar that Canada also had slavery as well. It was abolished on August 1st in 1834, just obviously, before the Civil War, and that's where a lot of the exodus of people from the states fleeing the slave states came over here to freedom in Canada. So, and after the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, when the laws got more strict, that's why Canada became the destination.
So between 1830s and 1840s, there was a lot of migration coming here as well. And here at Tubman, or Black Moses, also made about 19 trips to have about 300 escaped slaves to come into Canada. So as I mentioned about the Fugitive Slave Act, once that came out in 1850, a lot of people had used Canada as a way as their destination.
In terms of the a large explanation he gave about the black history month and black experience in here, if you have to summarize it in a very few sentences to the young people, how would you say that?
In Canada or in Oxford County? I think both in Canada and Oxford County. I think the reason why I express that is that just to dispel the myth that black people have been part of Canadian history for a long time. We are Canadian history, and there's such a lot of accomplishments that we have made, not just now with the sports and the entertainment, but they're entertainers, there's everything we have higher in the politics, in the arts and entertainment, just the whole slew of people in the contributing who made who made businesses. As I mentioned, in the Norwich Township, they had land, weren't slaves, they had money coming to this country, and they built schools, and basically the businesses that we have now, this is the thriving that we have. So this is the shoulders that we're raised up onto. So I think that was the important piece as well. There's a lot of contribution, and it's not just Black History Month to talk about the 28 days of February, but it's Canadian history to be 365 days of the year as well.
This makes it part of the mainstream history in here because it's a Canadian history, and that's what is important because it's not like 1 month exercise. It has to be a year-round exercise. And is there any final message you're gonna?
I think for me the final message would be hopefully that this information is in the schools, that we're able to have this out. Like I said, I have a book from 1970 in Hamilton with a teacher's guide, but yet a lot of teachers, a lot of people are saying they don't get this into the school curriculum. So this would be nice to be able to have that throughout the public school and even the high school as well. A lot of people don't know this history, so.
What about the message for the parents? Because the parents have to make the kids acquainted with their own history and the Black history.
Yeah.
So what's the message for the parents?
Well, I think, as I said, even the libraries, they do have the literature that's there, and there's lots of books. The books I have on my display, half of them are Canadian, and the other one is American. So both Canadian and American, there's lots of information there in terms of books, and a lot of them are catered to children as well. So talks about the Underground Railroad, talks about the early Black settlers to this country. So again, there is information that's out there.
In Norwich Township, the area where I reside, again, you'll never notice there was Black population there, but because of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, some Blacks from Cincinnati who had money came to Oxford County in the Norwich area, where they purchased land, they built churches, they built a school, and they also had some sawmills as well. So there was quite a bit of businesses that grew up in the Norwich.
So the information is already out there. The parents should bring the kid in here and borrow the books.
That's right. And again, I think the school system being taught in the schools is I think is the foremost as well too.
Could you tell us a little bit about the word servant vis-a-vis slave?
Okay. So in Canada, when we did have slavery, I think the English had Blacks as slaves, but they called them servants. I think not to have that negative connotation, but not just Blacks, but Indians were also enslaved as well, and they were called pawnees. But again, it wasn't like what we think of what servants are for today. They still were slaves. They were, doing a substitute work that they did not want to do. The living condition was not, was not the great, and the treatment that they had of them too was similar to that as well. And I think this book, The Hanging of Angelica, the untold story of Canadian slavery and the burning of old Montreal, I think when you read that, that's just indicative of what we associate, what's happened in the States, in the Southern as well.
Language has a power relationship inside it. When you say a servant, it looks like you're paying him no matter what, and but in essence, it's a different it's a different engagement. So do you think that it was a way of running away from the negative connotation of the word slave?
I think it probably was, because, like I said, Canada did have slaves, and that's the terminology they used, trying not to be as negative, and also, in terms of what we know about what's happened in the States, that was over there. But again, when you do literature and read some of the Benjamin Drew stories of the fugitive slaves, again you'll find stories in there as well too, in terms of the treatment that they had.
Harriet Tubman was the first woman and only woman to lead American troops into war. On March 10th, in 1913, Harriet Tubman was passed away at the age of 91, and she died with military honors. So in 1851, Harriet Tubman settled in St. Catharines in Ontario. She stayed here for about 8 years. She had brought all her family over. Did anyone see the movie Harriet? The movie that just came out? So yeah, so they mentioned that she had had all her family, well not all, some people had passed away, her parents and some siblings come over as well. So she settled in St. Catharines, the museum there for her as well. And but when the when the Civil War broke out, she went back to the States, and she served as a nurse. She served as an aide, and to this day.
This reminds me about certain words, how they are used, and then the kind of, for example, when you say a slave and enslaved, they give two different meanings. An enslaved person was an independent person before that. But if you say he is a slave, this is one of the things the professor at the Black History Month opening ceremony kind of made a discourse analysis. He said that we need to change the language and understand and the connotation it has. And it ties with that in terms of the servant word you use it, and I like the explanation he gave. But could you explain it a little more so that our audience would?
Well, yeah, like I said, they used the word servant, but it wasn't. It was more of is more of a slave. In terms of that. So I think it was them trying to denounce or not think that it was as evil or as bad as it was in the States for their own thing, to maybe justify that, so that's why it took over 41 years to eventually abolish slavery in Canada by the time it came around. So I think it was that kind of attitude and, with that as well. So, yeah.
In Woodstock, we all known about a town crier as in George Washington Jones, who became immortalized in 2004 when they named a walkway after him. George Washington Jones, I think I have him on one of my displays where it has the history unknown. He became one of the town crier and was quite popular in that community. They had said that his voice was so loud he could be heard in Embro, which is quite the distance away, so I'm sure that was a myth more than anything else. But he was quite the character. When he died, he had lived in the House of Refuge, but all the businesses got together and he had a very good send-off in the funeral. Display that was saying that we also have a video of this as well, and in there we have our Ingersoll journalist Stanley Smith, who stated that although Ingersoll had blacks for free here, they weren't treated very well. They didn't have a lot of employment, and some of the blacks moved on to larger sites, to Hamilton, Dresden, St. Catharines, and Chatham as well with that.
Heather, could you explain to us the historical pictures in here? There's so much history in there, and could you explain those things to us?
Okay. The Dilly House was the inn that John Brown had stayed in when he was here. There was rumors that the inn had a tunnel that led to the church to bring the slaves over when they were hiding out. However, in 1994, when the Ingersoll Inn was demolished, they couldn't find a trace of this tunnel, so that was one of the myths that was known.
So this one just talks about the Underground Railroad. So it talks about the history of how it started with the Quakers, and it gives a timeline. And on the other side, what it talks about is when the African slaves were captured and how they came over to the Middle Passage, which is they were sort of packed in ships, almost like sardines, and came over across Africa to North and South America. So a lot of the people did not survive with the conditions that they had, and a lot of people also threw themselves overboard, realizing they'd rather die than endure the slavery that what was happening to them too. So again, this talks about has a timeline, some 1400 all the way to the end at 1863 when emancipation does, and it just talks about the various people that were involved with that. Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, David Scott, various people that were involved in the Underground Railroad. I talked about Levi and Catherine Coffin, Harriet Tubman, and Harriet Tubman, that's my hero. But again, this is written for children. And this was back in 1999. And again, it just explains what Harriet Tubman, who she was. She was a freedom fighter, and just explain the terminology. So when we talked about the information there for children, this page in the newspaper, it was written for children, for them to understand. So again, this is just, again, talking about that. The Canadian stamp where I was in Telsabur Post Office was able to give me this. So talked about in John Ware, there was a stamp of him. He was a black Canadian cowboy, and that talked about life in the prairies, settlers. And this is one of the slave captures. So in places in the Free States and in Canada, they would warn people about slave catchers to be aware of people trying to be friendly, but their intent was really to capture them and take them back to slavery. So they'll have that in some newspapers. Other newspapers will have advertising slaves for sale as well. So it depends on on what side people were interested in too. So yeah, and this one is of Canada. This was just one in Niagara too. So it's not like everything was in the States. It was right here in Canada. Yeah. So. But yeah, and just talked about, this is Buffalo, Niagara Falls, about the Underground Railroad. So each community had to stop and just talked about the history that they had there too.
And then I was mentioning about in Ottawa, they have the African Methodist Episcopal Church that was there. That was erected in 1856. The land was purchased to build the church, and 5 years later it was debt-free. Unfortunately, there's no pictures with that. The only thing they have now is just a land with some headstones. Back a while ago, we were able to get some money and able to put some headstones in there as well. And that's the only thing that's in there as well. So if anyone would like, you can see the exhibit I have, and I have any more questions about that as well.
Yeah, quite educated.
Yes. Yes.
What kind of immediate changes do you expect to see in the school system in terms of incorporating this?
I think that's something we're probably working on. I belong in a committee. We are working on a brochure to help in terms of bring that information here in terms of an interactive app. So hopefully that will be one incentive to bring that, as well, to bring talk about all the situate all the historical sites in this area. And again, that would be another tool that we'll be able to use for both the public as well, and hopefully for the schools too.
So it means down the road we might be able to see an app we can use on our phone and then interactively learn about it.
Exactly, that's right, for this area, for Southwestern Ontario. Yes.
Oh, that's a great plan. I hope to see that app very soon and be able to use that.
Yes.
Yeah, I really thank you very much for the information you gave us. Thank you.
Thank you.